Welcome everybody. My name is Brian Chow. I am a newly hired program director for the BioStrategy partners. We have a very wonderful panel today for you guys. The topic is about choosing the right contract research organizations for your startup or academic needs in order to develop your product or technology. So I just want to do a little brief background about what BioStrategy Partners is. It's a nonprofit organization that's designed to really accelerate the transfer of technology from academic institutions with the help of industry partners to hopefully accelerate the commercialization of inventions coming out of academia. And I would like to take a moment to thank the sponsors of BioStrategy Partners. I'd like to thank MVM Associates, the Stradley Ronan, to thank Server-Sign Properties, Cantor Fitzgerald, as well as University Place Associates. And thank you very much to the sponsors for hosting this event. All right. And so we have a very wonderful panel today for you guys, and I'll kind of let the panelists introduce themselves so they can go into all their backgrounds and stuff. And just as a reminder, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I'll kind of monitor them as they come in. I'll hold some of the questions till the end, but if it's relevant to discussion, I'll ask right away. Okay, so with that said, I'll turn it over to Tina.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I want to first thank the BioStrategy partners for inviting us to be part of this really important panel discussion. And I would also like to just emphasize what Brian had said. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat as we go through the conversations. We really like to have a robust, engagement and participation if we can. So I will introduce myself first, and then I'll pass it on to my partners here. So maybe Dr. Parent could take it after me. So my background is that I started out in academics. I was an academic researcher. I did non-clinical humanized animal model development for many years and worked in the space of developing anti-HIV prophylactic treatments. So I spent quite a bit of time there. I did transition into industry and served as a program manager in a contract development pharmaceutical manufacturing industry. And I had a diverse set of clients. I would say I had both small biotech companies as well as the large pharmaceutical giants people are very well aware of. And I had products that were in different phases of the development pipeline. So a lot of different stories to bring to the table there. I did head up a federally funded GLP/GMP training workforce development program. And I think that's really important because that was asked by the industry for academic partners to step up and see if there's a way to improve the talent pipeline. So I enjoyed that work very much. And I'm currently at Penn State College of Medicine in their Center for Medical Innovation. And what I do there is I work very closely with the academic researcher, identifying and helping them to develop early stage technologies primarily, and then eventually partner them up with the appropriate industry partners. So I'm very happy to be here today. And I'll pass it over to Dr. Parent.
Thank you, Tina. Yeah, I'd like to also thank BioStrategy Partners and Brian for inviting me to participate in the panel. So like Tina, I also have an academic background. I have a PhD in molecular biology, cell biology, yeast genetics. I then did a postdoc at Brown University in Keith Boston's lab, again in yeast genetics. He was then recruited to Merck and Company to get involved in the microbiology programs there and to increase the strength of the antifungal group. And at the time that he was being recruited, he asked me to consider opportunities there, and I decided to join Merck and Company. So I spent 21 years at Merck in R&D in primarily antifungals and immunology and inflammation. So I have backgrounds in a couple of different areas there, primarily in early discovery, target validation, and contributing to screening programs and lead optimization programs. In 2008, I was impacted by a downsizing, so I made a transition into business development, and I've worked for several small independent biotech companies that were performing contract research for either academic, biotech, or large pharma clients. I've also worked at a biotech company developing biosimilar monoclonal antibodies, and I was an alliance manager and also doing contract reviews and negotiations with CROs and CMOs. Most recently, I co-founded a biotech company called Kathera Biosciences, and I'm one of the members of the management team, and I'm really looking forward to this opportunity and this discussion because the CROs, CMO world is critical to moving products forward, and we actually also transitioned a founding technology from an academic lab, and we're building our programs, and we need partners to work with in order to advance our technologies. So I'll turn it over to Nina.
Thank you. And I'd also like to thank BioStrategy partners. I think this is a really great discussion today with a lot of good information for young companies. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So my name is Nina Semi-Nelson. I've been in the pharma industry for 22 years. 8 of those years I started out in the Drug Safety and Metabolism organization at YS Research, really working with drug development teams to move various small molecules, biologics, vaccines along the various sort of path of development and into humans, and working from that perspective. Also, from the safety perspective, working on those, specifically on those studies, as well as with the larger project teams. With that, I really became very interested in not just toxicology and safety, but really more looking at the bigger picture of drug development and how sort of that all fits together. And so I then moved to take a role at Covance, where I've been the last 14 years, which now is LabCorp, was bought by LabCorp a few years ago. And in this role, really have enhanced my expertise in the area of drug development, really focusing on small to mid-sized biotech companies and helping them to reach their milestones and goals as they move across that development path. So looking forward to the discussion today. I think hopefully there's a lot of good information that can be gained, and we can probably get started.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a great diverse representation on this panel, so I'm really interested in hearing these different perspectives. So I'll kick it off. I just want to make sure we've got a lot of acronyms going on here today, and I just want to make sure for anybody who is unfamiliar with this space that we clearly identify what we're talking about. So when we talk about contract service organizations, we're talking about organizations that may, but most likely do not produce their own product. They're there as a service for other companies or any industry partner to help guide and develop their drug program forward. So it may be something of formulation help, it may be stability, it may be manufacturing, but they all have their own special services, and they are available both for large pharma, small pharma, virtual pharmacies. They're available for academic partners, so a wide variety of clients. I also want to point out, I know Brian has on this slide here, CRO stands for Contract Research Organization. That's your organization that's going to help you primarily with setting up your clinical trials and doing all that important work. CMO, the M stands for manufacturing. So if you need any type of oral dose formulations, parenterals, sterile injectables, any type of manufacturing needs, they can help you there. And in more recent times, the D has been added to that, and that stands for development. And so if you are very early in your drug development program, you may be interested in that D because they can help guide and advise you with making your ideal drug product. And then the other acronyms that may be thrown out there today, SOW is your statement of work. So when you engage with a contract service organization, you want to make sure that you have very clear and concise objectives and your goals are aligned. End to end, that means that if you find a contract organization company that you're really partnering well with and they have the capabilities that you can actually carry your drug development program throughout the pipeline. So end-to-end program is what that refers to. And then last but not least, you may or may not hear the term FTE, which stands for full-time equivalent. A full-time equivalent is when you have so much work with your contract organization that you actually would prefer to have people work exclusively on your project. So that's another service offering there. But I don't want to go into too much. I want to hear from our other panelists. So I'm going to ask a question for Nina first. And can you highlight specifically some of LabCorp's service offerings and really, let us, especially newer clients that may not have a lot of experience in this area, what type of offerings you offer for those?
Yeah, thanks. So I think in regard to sort of special service offerings for smaller clients, really, we like to think of ourselves very much as having LabCorp drug development has sort of that across the entire development pipeline of a molecule, all of the services needed. So it's almost like a pharma company that does not have its own molecules, as you just mentioned earlier. But we have many of the capabilities, most of the capabilities with the exception of the CMC piece, which is the synthesis of the test article itself. Beyond that, really, from the moment that molecule sort of goes on to that development path, all the way through registration, LabCorp can facilitate moving that molecule forward. Some of the special programs that we have, the first one that I'll talk about is the team that I am on. It's called Early Phase Development Solutions, or EPDS. And this is a team in which sort of a drug development leader, somebody who has been in the industry for a very long time, who has brought several molecules forward, and really has a good sense of regulatory requirements and sort of what's needed to get this drug through the various stages of development. And has the scientific expertise and understanding of the various types of molecules. That person will partner together with a project manager who really focuses on sort of the timelines, the logistics, and communications. And together we will pull together sort of a Covance team on the ground there to help and facilitate moving across, putting all of these different studies together that you need to reach the various milestones. Sort of in a phased approach. This, initially focuses more on the non-clinical side, as prior to filing of the IND or CTA, and that's an investigative new drug or clinical trial application in Europe, which after that point, which you can go into human. So starting out in that non-clinical phase and then really progressing through and sort of seamlessly allowing that molecule to move across the drug development stages. So that's really the first, sort of having your own, if you think about in pharma, having your own drug development team sort of on the ground there that will work together with you to help you to meet goals and milestones and really make it a more seamless process. As we typically will work with clients that will place an entire program with us rather than just independent studies. And that allows us to really take a broader look at the overall strategy of the program and to really partner and work together to get to where we need to be. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is something called Marketplace, which is really, it sort of connects small companies, which we'll call providers, with seekers. And it's so anything from a small or mid-sized to even large company can be connected with some of LabCorp's more strategic pharmaceutical and biotech partners, as well as life science investors. And so that's really open to anybody that is doing work with LabCorp. We have, it's sort of, I guess, a way to explain it would be sort of a dating service, right? Where you put some basic information out there, and then as the seekers find the providers, that they can make that connection and share additional information if there's interest. So in 2021, so far we've really made 14 separate connections using that program. And the only qualification to be a part of that is really just, working with LabCorp. But I think that's a really interesting one, especially for smaller companies, as a way, an additional way likely to connect with larger pharma that might be looking for molecules. So I'll stop there and pass it along.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic opportunity. I really love the way you highlight the way LabCorp is directly trying to engage and capture that newer clientele, because that type of help is much appreciated on the academic side and with those smaller companies. So, Steve, I know that you have utilized and realized the benefits of these service organizations with your own company. So I thought maybe you could share some insight there.
Yeah, so at Kathera, we founded the company in 2020 in January, and my co-founder and I realized that we were going to have to my co-founder's in an academic institution, and he had technology that we want to build the company around. And we realized that we were going to have to engage contract research organizations, CMOs, et cetera, to move everything forward, because we plan to actually initially fund the company through non-dilutive SBIR grants. We decided not to originally go out and start pitching to investors. We did raise some family and friends money, but we decided to first go with some non-dilutive funding. And it was clear once we assembled a management team and started thinking about the program that we were going to have to start, reaching out to partners, so to speak. So we applied for an SBIR grant from NIAID, and we actually, on that grant, it's a phase 1 grant. We actually have 2 subawards. They're not with CROs, so they're not a traditional CRO, but we're working with academic groups, 2 different academic groups, to do some of the work that we can't do in the company itself. So we, the co-founder has a subaward to develop some biological reagents for the company to use in our screening programs. And we also have a subaward contract with a lab, an academic lab that's doing chemistry, medicinal chemistry for us, that's being directed by one of the members of our management team. And without their support, we wouldn't be able to really move the company forward for reasons that I don't really want to go into at this point in time. But I also worked at Oncobiologics and was involved with their biosimilars. So Oncobiologics is a company that was developing biosimilar monoclonal antibodies. And I joined the team, I guess, about 6 years after their existence to help with alliance management and contract reviews. And that team actually was doing a lot of its internal manufacturing work around biosimilars, but they had grown to the point where they had a pipeline that was really stressing the organization. So we needed to start reaching out to different groups, clinical research organizations, CMOs, to help with things like planning and executing the phase 1 and the phase 2, not phase 2, phase 1, phase 3 clinical trials, and actually executing those trials. And we also, our manufacturing capabilities were starting to get stressed internally. So we had to start reaching out to CMOs to be able to do things like make enough product for the clinical trials, do the fill finish, do the labeling, do the regulatory, aspects. We had a good team that could manage that internally, but we didn't have the capabilities to do it on our own. So it was critical for that company as well. And I know, big pharma's doing it. Everybody's in the game of working with CROs and CMOs, CDMOs. So it's just critical, I think, to move products forward in any organization.
I agree with that 100%. CDMOs, CROs, they're usually behind the scenes players. I think we see, and I have a question from a colleague that we'll get to in a little bit, but I think we, with COVID-19, has really seen the value up front and center of how critical CROs and CDMOs are in the process. And so, for that, we're very grateful from all aspects of the research spectrum. So I do want to address engagements with clients. So I know, Nina, you mentioned project management, and I totally echo that, having done that role before. I think that's your critical point of contact when you work with those CDMOs and CROs. I would like to just kind of take us a step back. If somebody has never done this before, what is the best way to get out there and start looking around at different service providers and start to evaluate which one is the best one to use, and how do they make that initial contact? So I'll put it back to you, Nina.
Okay. So I think as you think about, how do you go about selecting a CRO? I think there's sort of, the three legs of the stool, right? That comprise sort of what your product is. One being the capabilities and the quality of the product. The second being sort of the pricing and the cost of the services. And then the third is really time and scheduling and all of the aspects of time that go with the program. And so I think, as you initiate, thinking about what type of CRO, those are sort of the three major pieces, I think, that probably come to mind to any company that's looking for something like that. I think some of the major success factors, as I think back to clients I've had that have gone exceptionally well, that we've had, repeat programs with, is really the communication piece. So finding a team and finding individuals that, really can work well together, that can be honest with each other, so that if something is not going well, that it gets put out there immediately and can be rectified, right? Without that communication piece, I think, things can go astray. So I think it's really communication's a very important aspect, as well as really having that partnership. The success of the relationship, I think, understanding that CRO, is sort of a piece of your team, that they're working on your behalf and for your success. And so, providing them with the information that you have is very helpful in, even from a technical perspective, the folks that are in the labs and such, if they know what they're working on, it allows for greater engagement. But certainly the scientists that are working, to move your molecule along and to help you to reach your goals and milestones, I think that partnership is key, to have a group that you're very comfortable with and that you're confident in, to be able to move the molecule forward. The other piece, I think, is taking a lab where you can take more of a programmatic approach, so that, a lot of smaller startup companies, might only be 2 or 3 people, and their expertise might be more scientific and maybe more in line with the indication or the mechanism of the molecule, and not as much with the regulatory requirements and knowing where they need to go. And so having sort of a programmatic approach where, we will place an entire program and, to a specific CRO or a specific lab to run the program allows for that continuity and being able to really have that communication and have the lab also be able to see sort of the larger picture of, what does the data mean, not just for the study, but what does it mean for the program? Whereas I think if you sort of split those studies up between various labs, it's a lot more labor intensive than for a small organization, a small company that may not have that expertise to work to pull all of that together. Those are just things I think to consider and to think about sort of as you jump into the process and get started.
I couldn't agree with that more. I know when we first started engaging with clients that were just trying to scope out their work and have that initial conversation, usually our business development team brought the clients to our attention. So we kind of had a little bit of background as to what type of drug they were trying to develop. And then we would do our homework on the back end and sit down and have that initial consultation. And I know that is something that LabCorp does because I've worked with you guys to do that as well. And that is so valuable to have expertise at the table to really properly scope out your work. So I'm going to throw this to Steve. Maybe you can speak to some of the requirements that go into a statement of work, or maybe some lessons learned that you had or some of your colleagues have had where the scope of work maybe wasn't completely aligned because it wasn't comprehensive enough, and or how you compare and contrast when you get these quotes from different organizations.
Yeah, that's a terrific point, Tina. I think the statement of work, actually, even before you start engaging a CRO, it's important internally to have a discussion with your team. What do we want to accomplish with the CRO or the group we're working with? And what do you really want in terms of deliverables and timelines, and get that feedback from them? So I've actually done that with my colleagues at Oncobiologics, and then I took that as a framework for a statement of work to reach out to a CRO and to start engaging them. And you can actually, the more detail you have in the statement of work, the better it is in terms of what your expectations are, what the timelines are. And once you have that framework, you can actually go out and, pitch it to, reach out to, LabCorp or other organizations and get feedback. And you might find that, you get prices back for whatever you want to do that are all in alignment, which is great. And then it's a pretty easy decision about how you're going to move forward. You may not have to do a lot of negotiation unless you're really strapped for cash, but you might find all of a sudden, wow, these quotes are way off base. One is, half of the other or even less. What's going on here? And then I think you need to go back and reflect. Why are they so different? Is it something we're missing and we haven't thought of? And then, once you have that discussion internally, you can go back to, the different CROs, ask for more details about what they're going to provide you, and then get a real sense as to, what the price for your studies are going to be. And then I think you're in a much better position to actually start negotiating with different CROs. But the statement of work and developing it, at least a framework for it early on, is critical. And typically when I've seen interactions start getting tense and breaking down is when the two teams weren't aligned in terms of what the deliverables were and what the timelines were. If you have some sense as to what the deliverables are, you can usually, work through the problems. And if there's bumps in the road, which there always are in a development program, you know that, we're all working together to achieve those timelines, and somehow we'll do it. But if you're not aligned in the beginning on what the expectations are, it creates a lot of tension.
Absolutely. Alignment is critical, both for your internal teams before you go to the CRO, and then when you engage with them to make sure that's clearly articulated. I think also very, very, very important point, at least one that I experience on the academic side a lot, is that you don't know what you don't know. And so a lot of times what goes into the quotes are things that you're not familiar with that may provide a little bit of a sticker shock. So those regulatory requirements are critical. And you may not be familiar with what goes into a quality review or what goes into a finalized report that you can submit to the agencies and things of that nature. So those types of data overviews and outputs are very, very different than just having a report come out of a lab, for example. So that's why you might see some of your pricing be substantially higher. It's because you have that higher level of quality control checks and that higher standard. So the expectation's higher.
Yeah. Can I just add there too?
I think that's a great point. I think, as we talked about EPDS previously, really, we're developing programs really in line with what are the regulatory expectations. So as you said, making sure that you have sort of that apples to apples comparison across quotations, and to have a discussion. And I think one of the things that we do, as a new opportunity comes in, is the very first thing we do is we sit down and we have a conversation with the client about their molecule, their indication, what their goals are, where do they want to be, what are they trying to accomplish. And so after that, we will sit down and put together really a proposal of, okay, here's what, based on the information you've given us, your route of administration, what your clinical plan might look like for this molecule and this indication, thinking about putting together all of those pieces of information, coming up with a program to help you to reach a specific milestone that will, really meet regulatory approval. And that's really the goal is, not just to run studies for the sake of getting more information or more, you're past that point once you hit development, right? Now the goal is to meet the regulatory expectations so that you can move on, so that you can move to your first in human, your phase 2, phase 3 aspects of your program. So I think that's something that, we take very seriously, and we, that to me, that's the funnest part of my job, is sitting down with a client, learning about their molecule, learning about sort of where they want to go, and then putting a program together that helps them to get there.
Yeah, I was going to also just chime in. I think it's important too for very early stage companies to know what your weaknesses are. If you need and know what you need to get for support, and you're probably you're going to need assistance either from a clinical research organization or a contract research organization that might do some preclinical work, or a CMO. But at some point in time too, it's helpful for the companies to really think about. So at Oncobiologics, we had a chief medical officer, and we had logistics teams to help us coordinate with the CROs that were doing the trials. We had a regulatory specialist who was interfacing with the groups we were working with, so that the teams had had some expertise and some guidance. Now, small companies may not be able to do that, but you can also get assistance from the CDMOs, or you can get consultants that will help you with some of the early things that you might be struggling with. But you really need to do that and accept you don't know what you don't know, and what you don't know can really kill a program. And so you really want to acknowledge that up front.
Absolutely.
So I want to ask kind of relevant question that came up. Todd asked during this discussion with the CRO. He's wondering whether CROs can augment their capabilities by accessing academic core facilities.
So that's a good question. I don't know how common it is. I do know that at a company I worked with called PBL Assay Science, that company is a company that provides it actually sells ELISA kits that for different cytokines. It was built around interferons by Sid Pesca, and they sell a lot of they manufacture their own kits and they sell them to a lot of companies that use them for studies. I don't know if they've been used in clinical trials, but they've been used in biomarker studies and things like that. But occasionally they also do some assay service work in the very early discovery space. And I think occasionally they have actually, if they needed facilities, or equipment that they didn't have. I think occasionally they did go to groups in academic labs or core facilities on universities to help them with some things like fax analysis and things like that. But I don't know if larger CROs like LabCorp would ever do something like that.
Yeah, I think, my past experience is that they don't. So in the CDMO where I work, they did not. And the reason for that was because you're under such stringent requirements to maintain compliance. And if an academic university is not, certified, or they're not doing GLP or GMP, it's too much of a risk for the CDMO, CRO. In some cases, it really depends on what your ask is, I guess. But in my past experience, no, we have not done that. Everything has to be QC checked through our regulatory groups, and so it would be too much of a risk to do that type of work. That said, I don't think that means that they can't partner, they can't have discussions, or you can't further your development, in academics using the core facilities that you have. But at least my past experience, it was pretty much you're coming to the organization, this is what you want, and you're setting the bar and the expectation very, very high to make sure that you do it exactly how it needs to be done and execute it under regulatory guidance. And so therefore they'll do it. That's what they're there for. I'll pass this on to Nina because I think, it's a good question.
Yeah. So I would say in general, you're probably right in as much as it's not all that common, but there are several assays that are maybe non-GLP aspects, a PD marker or something that we're looking at, for a specific program that, our organization doesn't have developed or doesn't have the assay or that can utilize some of these core facilities. And so I think that, we have partnered in the past. I don't know how common it is, but it does happen. But certainly, there are aspects of programs that, may not be regulated. So again, for, the GLP component of these studies is really anything that involving the safety of the molecule, right? So if you're showing that the molecule is safe, that all has to be conducted under GLP conditions. If you throw an efficacy marker into a toxicology study, that can be a non-GLP component of a GLP study. And so I think more so those are the types of areas where we might look at partnering with some of these academic labs.
Yeah, that's a great point. So it really depends on the program and what the ask is and what you're trying to execute there. But it's definitely worth an open dialogue, open conversation, and see what the opportunities are there for your specific program. I do want to make sure that I get to this question because I thought it was a really great question. And I said this earlier, you know, I really think COVID-19 has brought to the forefront all of the value that CROs and CDMOs bring to the table. I mean, that was a historic accomplishment in getting the vaccine distributed globally in record time. And it was really done with a lot of partners coming together in an unusual fashion, honestly. And so that was a great thing. I also read that LabCorp recently, in the beginning of the month, just got emergency use authorization for a home COVID test kit that also tests for influenza A and B. So fantastic innovations going there that really address global public health needs. The question that I had, though, was when with COVID-19 and we're still reeling in the consequences of COVID-19 as it first came out in 2020. And we had these global supply chain halts and delays and sometimes, you know, complete shortages. How has this impacted the CROs, CDMOs? How have you seen this impact your organization? And what type of mitigation plans do you have? Has it changed your timeline? Do you have other unique approaches now to addressing these shortages and delays? So Nina, I'll pass it to you first.
Sure. So I think definitely, you know, COVID impacted everybody, I think, in so many ways, right? And I think in our pharma industry, I think, you know, the effects were probably actually that maybe even more work got done, right? And I think we all became much busier than we had been previously. You know, so many companies were immediately jumping in, which is so awesome, and it's so cool to see how quickly, you know, new ideas and new ways of looking at things were coming up to look at new drugs for COVID, and seeing how many clients we had that were trying to focus on that area. But with all of that, you know, really we have seen that the industry has, we've had a huge impact on timelines. I would say, you know, to start, just as an example, to start a tox study, typically one might, you know, start discussions maybe 2-3 months prior, considering, you know, when you want to start that study, considering, you know, all the resources and everything involved in the setup and, you know, all of that. I think right now we're looking more at timelines, you know, really looking at 9 to 12 months out for placing studies. And that has had and that's really, you know, that's not just LabCorp, that's across the industry. And I think, you know, some of the things that we've done that I'm really, quite frankly, surprised at how the industry has adjusted. And clients are thinking much further ahead as far as, you know, what are we going to be needing next year, and really starting to put those plans together, having those discussions, getting those spots, and really sort of, it has caused for, you know, there to be a lot more pre-planning, I think. As far as our process, I mean, you know, we've obviously had to adjust as far as, you know, number of technicians in the room if people were out sick, all of those, of course, you know, logistical things which every organization has had to deal with. And I think that, you know, we've really had probably a very, very successful approach in that, you know, we've really not ever stopped working or stopped any of our studies or had anything like that occur. And we've really been able to continue business as usual, though, you know, I think it's been busier in that people are planning much further ahead, and things are sort of booked out much earlier.
Yeah, I think that's a great point of pre-planning is now even more critical than it was previously. And I think also this is a universal issue that everybody slowed down in their own way, in their own organization, and that includes the agency too. There has been a slowdown a little bit in terms of response time because their priorities have shifted to get this in, to deal with COVID. Stephen, did you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, actually, so so for Kathera, it impacted us tremendously. So we actually officially incorporated the company in January 2020. My co-founder and I went to NIH for a meeting. So the company we're focused on developing antifungal drugs. We went to a great meeting at NIH in Rockville on Candida auris infections and pathogenesis. And there were several CDC people that were at the meeting, and they gave talks. It was a short, I think, 2 or 3 day meeting. So at the end of the meeting, someone asked, well, when are we going to have, are you going to have a write-up of the meeting and, notes and things and sharing resources? And someone from CDC mentioned, well, we may be a little bit distracted. And that was the first hint to me that, what was going on in China was going to have a big deal on a lot of us. And sure enough, it happened. And it really ground a lot of the work that we were doing, because we were in the planning stages, developing a business plan, thinking about how we were going to raise funds, thinking about writing our first grant. And it just really slowed everything down like it did for everybody else. So it not only on our side, so we applied for our first grant in September of that year of 2020. And it was to NIAID, it was to, Dr. Fauci's institute. So we got a score that was just above the pay line for the grant. And in most typical years, the grant would have got funded. But because the NIH and NIAID was so focused on COVID, they ran out of money. They couldn't basically, fund the study then. So we spoke to the program manager, and she encouraged us to, resubmit in January of this year, which we did. And it was good because we had a chance to really rethink, improve the grant. And we resubmitted. We got a great score that got funded, and we actually just started the work in June of this year. But we're still facing supply chain issues. So we have issues with just getting things, in an early discovery space, things like, plasticware, tips, plates to run assays, chemicals to do. We've been working with a university doing medicinal chemistry. They're having issues getting, chemicals to do the syntheses. And that was actually happening. We were actually working with them before we actually submitted the grant. So that was happening during COVID, and it's still happening today. We're still, things are backlogged. And I actually just have been reaching out to some chemical vendors to buy some analogs for compounds. And I'm anticipating there's going to be delays in getting some of those compounds to us because of, all of the issues with the supply chain on, chemicals. It's actually provided new opportunities, I think, for some people. So I'm aware of a company that is actually thinking of, so a lot of the chemical industry in the pharma area has offshored a lot of, some of their synthesis of intermediates and things like that to places like China and India. And I think there are companies now that are thinking about reshoring some of those things back into the US to, try to have more control over some of the things so that you don't have these huge global shutdowns, if we have another pandemic or issue like that.
Yeah, there's definitely a number of preventative programs that are getting off the ground now to prevent these types of issues. But yeah, I have many colleagues in the space that are in the middle of manufacturing, and then just, to have solution shortages or raw material shortages, it's really critical. So definitely an important thing to keep your eye on. And the best we could do is to, as you said, pre-plan, think about things earlier, get involved earlier, maybe look at alternative solutions earlier, like all of these new asks are sort of on your plate in terms of development, and prioritize, right? Prioritize what is the most urgent thing to get you to move forward, and do that first. That's the best you can do. So we are the last couple of minutes. I just want to encourage, if anybody has any type of question, please put it in the chat. If not, I'm going to do the roundtable to kind of go around for final thoughts and just any other insight, words of wisdom that you would like to convey to the audience members. Please do so. So I'll start off with you, Nina.
Yeah, I think, in general, I think some of the things to think about, I think one thing we didn't touch on that I think sometimes comes as a shock to, small companies that are just starting and want to sort of move to the next step is the amount of material that's needed as you move into development. So, up until that point, maybe studies are done that require less test article and the quality of that test article. So just two things to think about is that, now we're going within toxicology studies, obviously, to much higher doses and in larger species. And so that will inevitably require additional material. And also the quality of that material should be similar to what you intend to dose in human in phase 1, so that if there are any impurities present, all of those types of things that you've thought through that, and that those can be qualified in your non-clinical studies as well. So I think that's just one thing that I think I had wanted to touch on and just didn't get to today, but it's sometimes I think gets companies hung up because up until that point, you've really never had to have that type of quantity of material, so that kind of ramping up at that stage. But otherwise, in general, just want to kind of put out there that I'm happy if you want to email me or with any questions or anything like that. If something comes up down the road, I'm happy to help and respond and help in any way that I can. So I'll pass it back on to Stephen.
Yeah, I agree with Nina. You really need to, especially if you're moving into development, you really need to think about what all of your needs are for your studies, and start thinking about doing stability studies for the products that you make. All of those are critical things, and you really need to, at that stage, you really need to start thinking about having your own internal project management group. I mean, it may just be 1 or 2 people, but you really that's important to keep your own management team up to date on the project timelines, and to be interfacing with the CMOs or CROs that are doing your work. We had that at Oncobiologics. We had a great team of people, and we had 2 terrific project managers that kept everybody aligned, and their roles were critical. I can say even in Kathera, we're at the very early stages, and what we really could use, if we had the funding, is a project manager to help with a lot of some of the issues that we're doing, because once at the very early stages of a company, you tend to wear a lot of hats. And so, I'm a de facto project manager at this point in time. And, it's just an added thing that I have to do. And as soon as we get funding, that's one of the first things that, I'd like to try to get into our company. The other thing that I would say is, and I think I mentioned this earlier, is plan, and plan early, because good planning will usually help in the long run. And if you have planning, when I kind of put together a plan, I actually start seeing where the pitfalls are, and you come up with scenarios for how you're going to deal with some of those pitfalls or those hurdles. And I will say one of the blessings of COVID for Kathera is with the shutdown, it actually focused the team on really planning the company's business model out. We had an idea, we had a couple of ideas, and we were ready to just jump right into it. And when we started planning more, we actually uncovered some new opportunities and really thought about some new ways to actually build the company. So that for me anyways. It was frustrating at the time when I was going through it, that we were being delayed with some of the work that we were doing and the submissions of the first grant. But in hindsight, it gave us an opportunity to really plan through that program and really focus on a new opportunity that we're really excited about. And I suspect if COVID hadn't happened, we wouldn't have put in as much planning into the second program.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, that the planning is key. I also think communication is key. I see that Mitchell has a comment in the chat box, and I agree 100%. And the question is, really to make sure you understand, and it may be difficult for academic institutions or individual investigators to really understand the full scope of what is needed and the knowledge base and that toolbox and what questions to ask and how to plan, what you're planning, all of those types of things. So I know academic institutions here at Penn State, we have the Center for Medical Innovation, and we serve as a hub to answer those types of questions and to help guide our researchers through that process. I also just want to put out there, and I know we're almost out of time, but I think this is so important, and I've seen this, put an NDA and a CDA in place when you have these conversations with the CROs, CDMOs. And the reason why is because they are a wealth of knowledge, and they're there in your best interest in terms of planning a scope. So what you want to do is make sure that you can have an open conversation that everybody feels comfortable with, everybody's protected, but you need to go through some of the details of exactly where you are in your program to get the best outcome and the best design in your SOW, right? If you're withholding information and not really having that honest conversation, then it's very, very easy to have misalignment with goals and scope of work. So put the protection you have to have in place, have that initial sit-down meeting, and have that honest conversation, because it's in the best interest of accelerating your technology. So to the point in the chat box, yes, you have to reach out and start having these conversations with people and getting yourself well-versed with what type of questions to ask. And there are a lot of players out there, if need be. Put those legal documents in place so that you feel comfortable with having those conversations. And I'm going to pass it back to Brian.
Okay, thank you, Tina. And thanks. I just wanted to thank everybody, especially Tina, for organizing or moderating this panel and providing excellent topics. And I want to thank Steve and as well as Nina for being great panelists. As an aspiring entrepreneur, that really helped me kind of think about what I need to do if I go down that route. So I would like to thank our sponsors again. And again, please feel free to contact us. You can contact me at admin@biostrategypartners.org. If you want introductions to either Tina, Steve, or Nina, I'm definitely willing to help out. And I also had their emails before, so just contact me and we can go from there. And again, thanks everybody for attending the panel discussion, and I hope you learned something, and I definitely did. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Brian. Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.